Bourgeoisie produces, above all, Art Zone. Gravediggers.
Hear me out here. Buzz Lightyear receives messages or instructions from beyond, is admired by some in the village while the elites, namely Woody, feel threatened by his presence, is clearly God's or Andy's, however you want to view it, favorite, aka the chosen one, is exiled but, after exhibiting courage, faith, and loyalty, returns to his home as a hero. Buzz Lightyear is the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and Toy Story is an allegory for the Hadith.
I see no error in that analysis. That is absolutely correct. And Toy Story's climatic third act is basically the Hijra, if you think about it. They did the Hijra to Sid's house and back.
Exactly. So, podcast over. Good job, everyone.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, there we go. See you next time.
Welcome to another episode of Current Criminal. If you are not a Patreon subscriber and you are a little bit confused right now, allow us to explain. Due to some personal obligations, but also as a treat to all of you, hopefully, we are releasing this week's Current Criminal for everyone. So we're just going to put this up as our regular episode, and we'll be back next week with a continuation of our Arab Uprisings series. So normally this is part of our Patreon grift, but this week and this week alone, we are releasing it to everyone.
Yeah, it's a Christmas special for everyone. Happy holidays.
I guess we should give a spoiler alert for Toy Story. It's 25 years old, so...
Look, if you haven't seen Toy Story, you're too young to listen to the podcast. Go I don't know, what do kids these days do? Play with your beep bops or whatever.
They play Among Us.
Isn't Among Us supposed to be on iPhones, which are not supposed to be given to kids?
It's on Nintendo Switch now, and it's also on Android, and you can get it on your computer.
Oh, okay, that makes sense. I haven't played Among Us, but I heard it's supposed to be a fun game, so go play your Among Us and leave the adults to do the adulting.
I would actually really recommend this film if you've never seen it. It's one of those films that once you watch it, you'll start to notice a lot of references to it that you somehow missed before.
Yeah, I think it's a seminal film in culture, in modern culture. It was the first animated film that was entirely done by computer, so there is a historical aspect to it. It is definitely the seminal influence for what would later become, Disney Pixar productions.
If you are, again, a little bit confused, we did say on our Patreon Current Criminal episodes that we will be reviewing hopefully all of the Pixar films, or most of them. We might skip a couple. But we kind of want to track the evolution of Pixar.
Yeah, I mean, they've just recently released a new one that I want to watch, Soul. We don't have to do the review now because obviously it's very new and I don't want to spoil it for people. But we can make our way up to that movie because it's supposed to be good. I haven't watched it yet.
Yeah, I've heard good things, or I've seen good tweets.
Yes, that's more like it. Yeah, I've seen good tweets, which is the equivalent of hearing good things at the local bar, I suppose.
So to give some background for Toy Story, as Aamer just said, it was the world's first entirely computer-animated feature film, as well as Pixar's first full-length film under the Disney banner. Basically what happened is, after the success of Pixar's 1988 short film Tin Toy, Disney approached the company to make a feature-length film about anthropomorphic toys. So the film is directed by John Lasseter, and the screenplay is by Joss Whedon, Andrew Stanton, Joel Cohen, and Alex Sokolow. It famously features music by Randy Newman, and it stars Tom Hanks as Woody and Tim Allen as Buzz Lightyear.
Tangentially want to chime in here to point out that Tim Allen is a Republican chud, which is, whatever, I don't care about that. But more importantly, Allen was caught in October of 1978 with over 650 grams of cocaine at the Kalamazoo airport. And when faced with life imprisonment for trafficking, he decided to cut a deal with the feds and rat out his dealers for a lighter sentence, throwing them in prison for life for a much lighter sentence of 5 years, of which he served 2. So not only is he a chud, he's a snitch.
Is it Tim Allen who was recently tweeting Karl Marx, Manifesto, Wikipedia, or something like that?
Yes. Yeah, he's like big boomer brain. He's the ideal boomer, the boomer, if you will.
Also, you don't need a Wikipedia summary of the manifesto. You can just read the manifesto. It is the OG Wikipedia summary.
The Wikipedia summary of the manifesto is longer than the manifesto. Just read the damn thing.
Toy Story obviously has been hugely successful, gaining critical acclaim and founding a Toy Story empire, and setting a precedent for Disney Pixar films as fun for the whole family. And I'd say this is emblematic of Pixar films and largely true. Like, I actually laughed out loud while watching this movie for the first time in a while, and I'm 24 years old. Toy Story is genuinely funny. When Woody is trying to stop Buzz from being scooped up by the Claw and the little green aliens are fighting him because they firmly believe that the Claw is performing some sort of rapture, and Woody goes, "Stop it, you zealots!" I was cracking up in my bed.
That was a good part. I think it was incredible because, I mean, the last time I watched Toy Story, I was a kid. So this was like, it's been a long time coming. And there were just so many jokes that completely, of course, I would miss as a kid that I came back to, and I was just completely dying of laughter at the sort of subtlety of them.
I mean, when I was a kid, I used to watch Cinderella, like the Disney cartoon 1950s Cinderella, every single day. And I watched it recently, and I didn't remember a thing from that film. I don't know what the fuck I absorbed from that. Not the plot.
Yeah, kids watching things is so fascinating because, like, and I speak as someone as a kid who used to watch things, because now I go back and I look at things that I watched previously, and I can't remember a single thing that I noticed now that I noticed back then, you know? It's really weird.
Right. I've definitely seen Toy Story before, but I just watched it in preparation for this episode, obviously, and it was like seeing a new movie.
I think kids' brains are not designed at that point to retain information. We watch these things as kids because they're very colorful and vivid and, you know, have pleasant sounding voices and
Yeah, it's about talking toys.
yeah, after the movie, you beg your mom to go to McDonald's to get a Happy Meal to get a toy. It's not so much like observing the movie as art, which, like, obviously, I wouldn't expect kids to appreciate art or whatever. But yeah, I think the difference between what I would call kids' entertainment and entertainment that happens to be for kids is that the former is just you let your kid watch something and it's just like, you know, distracting. Whereas entertainment for kids is, for me, things like Toy Story, where like it's designed for kids, but adults can watch it and still appreciate a lot of the art that goes into it.
Right. And the idea of talking toys or toys that have thoughts of their own, kids already think that. I used to like talk to my toys or like, you know, attribute human emotions to them. And I still believe in some part of me that like dogs and cats have thoughts as complex as humans, like going on in their heads.
I used to think that dogs and cats definitely had thoughts. I used to talk to animals and think that they understood. I'm not sure so much about toys. I don't remember talking to my toys. I do remember thinking that, you know, my toys can come alive, like a sort of like a Frankenstein's monster. So I was interested for a point in like trying to figure out how to get them to be alive. It didn't work, if you're wondering.
We wrote down our thoughts while watching this movie, and then we're going to do sort of an analysis at the end. Neither of us are film critics, but, you know, we do a podcast.
Yeah.
The first thing I noticed while watching is that in the opening scene, these corporate toys are on full display. You've got Mr. Potato Head, Trolls, Etch-a-Sketch, and I actually read Barbie wasn't in the first Toy Story because Mattel didn't want to license the character, but later they obviously like realized that error because of the popularity of the movies, so she's in the later films.
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely like a roll call for things that your kid will yell at you about wanting for next Christmas. I did find a hilarious bit early on when the toy, like Buzz arrives and the toys ask him where he's from. And, you know, he says he's from the great like Space Command or whatever. And they respond with their origins, and Rex goes on a tangent on how technically he's not from Mattel. He is from Mattel, but not from Mattel because when he was made, his origins were a subsidiary that were then purchased by Mattel in a leveraged buyout, which I thought was absolutely hilarious.
I'm wondering, how did the filmmakers decide which toys can talk and which are just like inanimate objects? Is there a hierarchy of talking toys similar to how humans have like the run of the world in terms of organized civilizations and industrial power, while other primates are just like monkeying around, for lack of a better term?
Well, I also think they weren't particularly clear on toy life and death, at least in the first movie. Do toys permanently die, or do they just get worse and worse wear and tear until they're no longer used?
We will get into it probably as we go on to Toy Stories 2, 3, and 4, but it seems as though, and I'm especially evidencing this by Bonnie's later sort of invention of Forky, that if the child sees it as something with a brain, it's actually like their imagination, their proclamation that puts the life in the toy. That's what I think.
That makes sense. I think this is an interesting analogy to something like Calvin and Hobbes, where Watterson, he portrays Hobbes as a doll to everyone except Calvin, who sees him as a living tiger. But for Watterson, he never actually says whether it's one way or the other. It's like both at the same time. And it's more or less a sort of like, it's Calvin's imagination, but also Hobbes does things that Calvin wouldn't have been able to do alone. So it's kind of fascinating, I think. And that's another thing, by the way, like, the toys move around and, like, you know, in the final scene when they're chasing the van, surely someone in the street saw toys chasing a goddamn van.
What really gets me, though, is Slinky. Because Slinky is a Slinky with the head and tail of a dog. How come the monkeys in a barrel are monkeys? They're just like animated monkeys. But Slinky, who's a dog, has a human voice and talks like a human. Why doesn't he bark like a dog?
That's a good point. Well, same could be said for Rex, really. Rex is a dinosaur. Dinosaurs shouldn't talk.
Right. Well, toys shouldn't talk, but maybe we're like looking way too far into it. But here is something that I want to bring up. Why is Bo Peep so sexy? And does Toy Story still somehow fail the Bechdel test? Like, I can't believe there's only one female toy in the first Toy Story, and she's a sex pot. That's ridiculous.
Oh, she's great. She's smoking.
So I looked it up, and according to Bechdel test movie list, Toy Story fails as it does not have at least two named women who talk to each other about something besides a man. But the forum is in great dispute over this, as someone called Scott comments, quote, "Immediately after Buzz's failed flying attempt, Hannah asks her mother where her Sally doll is. Her mother replies, 'What was that?' Hannah then sees the broken Buzz and says, 'Never mind.'" End quote. But this, in my opinion, is splitting hairs. This is a film centered on the toys of a male child, Andy, who are mostly males themselves, like Woody, Buzz, Mr. Potato Head, Rex, Slinky, Ham, and then you have Bo Peep, the one woman. And I'd argue that several of the Disney princess films, in which women and girls are obviously the main characters, are way more sexist than Toy Story in their portrayal of women. And I think this is actually crucial to our discussion of representation on the left. It's not enough to just be there. The message of the film itself and what it says about the characters is equally, if not more, important. For example, a historical war film that features mostly men in combat would be historically accurate. We should judge this film for the message it sends about war, whether it glorifies or criticizes imperialism, not whether women are like shown in the film.
Yeah, you see a lot of this discourse with video games as well, and bear with me here, this is a bit of a tangent, but watching the movie did point that out for me. So on the one hand, developers of video games will inject representation into various fictional and historical settings as what I consider a part of a sort of veneer of liberal platitudes towards acknowledging quote-unquote progress. And this inevitably leads to an overreaction from a large reactionary element of gamers, which are by and large reactionary, who claim that, developers are forcing PC values or SJW ideas into gaming, which itself is absurd. But then this leads to an entirely incoherent argument that completely misses the point between both camps here. And this is the fundamental crux of it. There's definitely a conversation to be had about representation as such. That being said, I also totally understand if a video game set during World War I, say for example, didn't have women as tank drivers or admirals if it was trying to stay true to form in terms of historical acuity. On the other hand, it does strike me as equally preposterous when gamers get mad at developers for including black or queer or women characters in clearly fictional settings like fantasy realms. The gamers' claim is that these fantasy realms are fictional stand-ins for what they consider medieval Europe. But then, to me, if a game has dragons and sorcery and orcs, you could easily push the suspension of disbelief or the suspension of belief a bit further to cover demographic changes in the population. By the way, not that medieval Europe wasn't much more diverse than these people think. That's another historical myth that they're all, white dudes. All of this is to say, for me, that the entire conversation about representation is quite interminable and exhausting. Because in the video game example, my concern lies not with the representation, but with fundamental politics within the work of art and as an art form and without it as a process of development. So within the art itself, for example, and I mentioned this in the pod multiple times before, look at Call of Duty Modern Warfare. The game garnered acclaim because you had heroic liberal women be a leader of a sort of armed guerrilla movement that was fighting both Islamists and Russians in this fictional Middle Eastern country. But then the game also glorifies US imperialism by making it such that you, the player, are either playing as a CIA agent or a British SAS officer. And in both cases, you fight alongside this woman and her faction against these generic bad guys without really examining how and why this setting is devastated by war as is. It is taken as a fact that the US and the UK are the good guys, their clients are good, progressive, liberal rebels, and the Russians are bad, and the Islamists are also bad, even though the Islamists are also fighting the Russian occupation in the same vein as the good rebels, but they're bad because they're Islamists. There's no analysis of imperialism there at all. And if you step back, it's all well and good to toss in representation within a game, but what are the conditions of the development of the game? Were developers forced to do crunch, which is when game developers, they're made to work overtime and spend like 6-7 days in a row working without really having a choice to meet deadlines? Do they have stable positions? Do they have labor protection? Are they unionized? A work of art can have good politics within the art, but if the process of producing it is abhorrent and exploitative, how progressive is the art? And, all of this is to say, for me, with Toy Story, you could apply the Bechdel test here and there, but I saw no problem in terms of representation because the movie is, like you said, Erin, about a boy and his toys that happen to be toys catered to a boy.
I think to bring it back to film too, Wonder Woman is actually a prime example. It has a quote-unquote strong female lead, but the actress, Gal Gadot, has repeatedly defended Israel's aggressions against Palestinians. It's not a feminist franchise, as if something of the sort were even possible under global capitalism. It's a PR win for the state of Israel.
Oh man, speaking of which, did you see the latest Gal Gadot controversy?
I did.
It's so funny. It is genuinely one of the funniest things I've ever seen. For our listeners who aren't aware, Gal Gadot has been cast as Cleopatra in an upcoming, I guess, a biopic or something. And she has been under fire by critics claiming that her being Israeli is inappropriate for her to portray what is an Egyptian princess, and that they should hire an African or Arab actor for Cleopatra. And her response is basically, and I swear to God, you can't make this up, Cleopatra was actually Macedonian, which is like it fucking rules.
And Cleopatra's parents were probably brother and sister.
Yeah. So historically, you should find someone who's Macedonian, born of sibling incest. Also, it's funny because not only has she pissed off Arabs now, calling Cleopatra Macedonian has pissed off the Greeks, who are now also angry at Gal Gadot for calling her Macedonian. They're like, actually, she's Greek, not Macedonian. There's nothing that shows how dumb and completely oblivious Gal Gadot is than wading into the ethnic nationalisms of the Greek and Balkan states. That is the funniest thing ever.
I do actually see the point of the Bechdel test. I know a lot of people rag on it, but it's not supposed to be the determinant for women's positive inclusion in film. Unfortunately, we still have to have discussions about this, but it's just supposed to be one way to look at, are women characters included in film as thinking human beings with complex backstories that don't revolve around men? I actually get the point of that. But of course, it's been totally obscured. I do think we have to have conversations in general about how representation doesn't mean being at the table in Obama's drone room.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. I mean, if your representation is being an executive in a boardroom or being in a drone room, then I'd rather no representation at all. Thank you very much.
To bring it back around to Toy Story, one theme throughout, and this isn't just the first Toy Story, it's really all of them, is that the toys have an intense fear of abandonment, of being replaced. And they're desperate for attention from children. And the worst thing is to be totally thrown away. which that is a deep and sort of complex theme to put in a children's movie. Although, like, lots of kids do have abandonment issues, and I assume can relate to this, actually.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like it was very weird watching it because it's almost like the toys believe their existence is to serve Andy, which is weird in its own way. But also, yeah, like being replaced is a very, very, very fundamental fear in the human condition. You know, we all have fears of being replaced by our loved ones, and watching it in a franchise is kind of scary, really.
I also wonder, so in the beginning, during Andy's birthday party, when all the toys are afraid he's going to get a cool new toy which might replace them, which obviously ends up being Buzz Lightyear, Woody decides to send out the troops, the little green army soldiers. Is he the commander-in-chief of this toy society? Is that his privilege as the sheriff? I don't understand.
Well, it seems to me that the toys take Woody's position as supreme executive as basically a function of him being Andy's favorite toy at the time. So I assume Andy is the designated kingmaker, and, you know, if he should identify a new toy as his favorite, that new toy will assume all executive power, including, you know, commander-in-chief of the army, which does sound rather anti-democratic to me, but, you know, that's my assessment of it.
Well, there is almost a religious element to this where Andy is their god. He breathes life into them somehow. And his favorite is the favorite on earth. Obviously, in many religions, those who are thought to be the most pious are seen as better in their communities.
Yeah, even though the toys complain about Woody, at no point do they actively challenge the arrangement the way things are, as far as I saw.
Well, they do clearly resent Woody's power among the toys because they're happy to tease him when he feels threatened by Buzz Lightyear. And of course, Buzz Lightyear literally represents like newness and change in this society. But sort of toward the end, they do gang together and toss Woody off the truck when they still think he's a murderer. And like, props to the toys for joining together in solidarity and literally chucking out the person they perceive as a rising dictator. I respect it.
Yeah, that was a good scene. I think that was the sort of culmination of the toys, I guess, coming close to what I imagine would be class consciousness. But they immediately retract that by realizing Woody has become good and then re-accept their subservient roles in the hierarchy of toys. Which, by the way, strikes me as interesting. I know you mentioned Buzz Lightyear represents change and newness. I think Buzz Lightyear also represents a radical injection of complete disarray to the system, which makes me think Buzz Lightyear can also be seen as Napoleon Bonaparte. He's a sort of Bonapartist figure that highlights the contradictions inherent within the crumbling, decaying, ancient regime of toy society.
I realize I'm not the first person to ask this question, but if Buzz doesn't know he's a toy, then how does he know to freeze when Andy is around?
He also freezes when Sid is around even before he realizes he's a toy.
True.
Yeah, so it is rather inconsistent.
Sid's mutilation of toys is genuinely concerning. Like, this is a sign of deep psychological issues, often stemming from abuse. It's kind of shocking that this is in a kid's movie.
Okay, it's definitely disturbing behavior and typical of early signs of sociopathy, especially if he evolves to harming animals. But that being said, it is also difficult for me to draw the line here. And, hear me out here. This is something I was thinking about last night. So it doesn't appear that Sid is aware that this behavior inflicts pain on toys as living, breathing, feeling creatures, at least until they show themselves to him. Spoiler alert. So, in other words, to him, at that point, he's simply playing with these toys. And of course, we as watchers, we know those toys are suffering, so we can identify his disturbing symptoms both through that, as well as his interactions with his sister, where, he's bullying her and stuff like that, and his extreme tendencies for violence, which are alarming in and of themselves. But on a metaphysical level, is there a difference between, say, blowing up a toy with a firecracker or smacking it about until it's like, its arms and legs pop out, like, Andy was doing to Mr. Potato Head in the beginning, where, he was playing with Mr. Potato Head being the villain and Woody being the hero of a play session, I guess. I definitely could say there's a difference in scale, but as you get closer to these things, the lines do blur over what constitutes sadistic torture of toys and what constitutes just particularly aggressive play.
I mean, why do his parents let this little terrorist operate? Even the carpet in the house, if you notice, is a reference to The Shining. the filmmakers want you to see that Sid is a sadistic little shit. I think the difference might be that he's a little bit older and he sees the toys as toys, not as possible living things. Like a really young child who has a doll, for instance, usually names it. I had a dollhouse where I had 3 dolls. They were named Mommy, Daddy, and Baby. I was obviously very creative. And I would act out like my parents getting home from work and like the things that I knew. I mean, that's kind of why like a child abusing toys is like a very, very serious sign. But I think it's supposed to be like Sid doesn't have empathy. That's what they're trying to say.
Yeah, that makes sense, I guess. I think they do emphasize it, like they do reinforce that in his treatment of his sister, which to me is the bigger issue. Like how the hell, like you as parents are allowing your son to like just completely destroy your sister's or his sister, your daughter's mental and physical well-being.
Oh, definitely. I like how in every Pixar film, just when you think the resolution has arrived, no, it hasn't. The toys are about to be safely reunited until something else goes wrong. And this is kind of a thing for them where you're like, oh, this is how the film resolves. But then it kind of has a twist at the end.
Yeah, no, it's nice. It was actually a pretty short movie overall too. I kind of miss the days where movies were like an hour and a half, give or take, long. All these long movies these days are really exhausting me.
It also makes me wonder why, because a movie ticket is the same price. Why would you make it longer?
Yeah, that's true. That's a good point.
So, what is the meaning of this film? There have been a lot of think pieces on this. I read some of them. One of the sort of takeaways, at least that I got, is that you don't have to be special or exceptional to be loved by someone, to be seen as special to that one person. And I can get behind that. Like, very few of us are truly exceptional in our careers or, distinguished as artists, athletes, or astronauts, if we want to use Buzz Lightyear as an example. And that's okay. That's fine. It doesn't mean we are unimportant or unworthy of love. And I've seen several reviews calling this like a dark message because kids' films are supposed to teach that you are special and you can do anything. But like, is this a dark message to say like, you can be special to someone without being renowned by the world? What's sad about that?
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think that's a good message. I think the delineation is between being special to someone and being renowned through some sort of like quantitative metric. You can be special and exceptional as a human being by virtue of your friendship to people, your love to people, the love people give you, without having to be renowned or great in some sort of career or productive sense. I think that's the flip really here.
Right. And I also think some kids watching this film are already well aware that the circumstances of their lives might be stacked against them. And perhaps this message of, you can do anything, you can go to the moon if you want, or you could be a good friend, you could be a nice, empathetic person, and that's worth something as well.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's healthy to teach kids that it's equally important to be exceptional in terms of like being, loving and caring and kind and emotionally a good person to the people around you as it is to like strive for some sort of career ambition.
Right. There's this message throughout of humility. Like both Woody and Buzz are humbled in different ways.
Yes. I found that actually really nice because you start out the movie not really sympathizing much with Woody because he's acting a bit like a dick because Buzz arrives and so on. But then both Buzz and Woody get moments where they are humanized, they are shown as vulnerable, and then they are humbled and they learn from their experiences. And together they dialectically become better than their previous iterations.
There's also that more direct message to Sid at the end where they say, take good care of your toys. And I mean, this is a simple enough message to children. Take care of your things. Don't damage things belonging to others, like how Sid would hurt his sister's toys, other people's toys. I actually agree with this message too. Like, we should take care of our things rather than damaging them and expecting new ones. Things we use, of course, they're going to have wear and tear, yes. But imagine how much we could reduce waste by taking care of things and fixing them when they're only minorly damaged instead of constantly buying new replacements. We need to be like the Cubans.
Yeah, oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you go to Cuba, and I haven't been, but I really want to, apparently they are like the world masters of taking care of like antique cars, like cars from the 80s and the 70s and the 60s.
Because of the embargo, yeah.
Yeah, which I think is remarkably impressive. I think for me, one of the biggest meanings of the film, or the biggest themes, is that change is inevitable and it's normal and it's an important part of personal and collective growth. And this theme runs throughout the whole series, of course, but it is well elucidated on here as a standalone movie. In the beginning, Woody is comfortable being the best toy. Everything is normal. It is the status quo. Andy has his birthday. All the toys are afraid. As Woody mentions, they're afraid every Christmas and every birthday. And it's not so much, you mentioned before, Erin, that they're afraid of being replaced, but they're also afraid of change. There's a deep underlying fear of change to the way the established order is.
Definitely, yeah.
Yeah, even if like the other toys aren't like Woody's position of being the favorite, they're still afraid of change. They'd rather have the established order than change. So when the arrival of Buzz threatens to upset the established order, Woody's anxiety peaks, and this leads to his overreaction and rather poor, unpleasant behavior. But then in the final scene, you have and this was something I found really nice. In the final scene, Woody is off to the side. He's smooching Bo Peep, by the way, so score. And, he's unconcerned with the opening of the Christmas gifts. And he's also comfortable giving up his place in Andy's bed to Buzz. Buzz appears to be in communication with the recon team, which, again, brings us back to that initial question. Is Buzz now the commander-in-chief? Have they abolished the old order? Is there like a democratic assembly or some sort of representative government? Or is it just because Buzz is now Andy's chosen one, he is the commander-in-chief of the army? But, in any case, they are more relaxed. They're accepting change. They are not as worried about, the new gifts until they hear about the puppy.
Oh, definitely. And you're right about this being a theme that we see in all of the Toy Story films. Change and grappling with anxiety over being replaced.
Yeah, it's a great movie. It's a great, I only watched Toy Stories 1 and 2. So once we get to 3 and 4, I'll be watching them for the first time. So I'm very interested. So I hope you guys really like this little Christmas special we have for you.
I do have a fun fact for you. Wallace Shawn, who voices Rex, the toy dinosaur, is a socialist and a member of Jewish Voice for Peace. He is Jewish. And he also has an essay collection and long-form essay published with Haymarket Books. And he went on Chapo in June.
Oh yeah, I listened to that episode. It's really good, actually. He is a gem and should be protected at all costs. My favorite role from him is Vizzini in The Princess Bride, of course. He is a real treasure, and I love him.
I think we should start a petition now to cast Wallace Shawn as Cleopatra instead of Gal Gadot.
He would definitely do a better job than her, by far.
100%, yeah. So thank you to all of our Patreon subscribers for making this episode possible. If you like this kind of content and you are not a Patreon subscriber, of course you can head over there. We're going to be reviewing more Pixar films over there. Up next is A Bug's Life. We're kind of going in order of publication for now. So if you want to watch it, catch up to us. It'll probably be out in around 2 weeks.
Yeah, Bug's Life is one of my... I've watched this as a kid, but not in a long time. So I am excited to watch it again and analyze why it's Maoist propaganda.
Yeah, we're obviously trying to bring the same sort of analysis that we have in our regular podcast episodes to a totally different genre. Instead of true crime, we're doing Pixar films.
Yeah. So if you enjoyed this, keep an eye out. There'll be more specials coming out, but there'll also, if you like this kind of content, do check out our Patreon. We do a lot of these kind of specials on Patreon, so do subscribe. It does help us a lot. We buy books to review. We have, hosting costs. So your support means the world to us. And we really appreciate our Patreon so far.
Next week, of course, we will have more Arab Uprising content. We are still in the middle of that very heavy series, but it's one that we're dedicated to, and we really want to do our best. So, of course, come back for that.
Yeah, so until next time, everyone, I hope you have happy holidays. To get some rest, you all deserve it. And please have a safe and happy New Year's.
Yeah, see you next year, guys.
Yeah, see you in 2021.
Bye.